Welcome to the Finance Function, the Innov8 Technology Podcast where finance technology meets real-world business. I'm Mike Armstrong, part of the Innov8 team, and we work with businesses across the UK and Ireland, helping them get more from their business systems. Today, we are diving into one of the biggest conversations happening in finance technology right now. It's Sage 200 versus Sage Intacct. What are the real differences? Where does maybe each platform fit? And why are more businesses than ever exploring cloud finance systems? To help answer all of that, and I'm sure a whole lot more, I've got one of the people right at the center of those conversations. It's our very own Chris Housecroft. Chris, welcome to the Finance Function.
Thank you. Looking forward to getting stuck in.
As ever, I'm absolutely sure about that. So maybe a little bit of a good starting point is just to give people a little bit of more of an insight into you and your role at Innov8.
Yeah, absolutely. So, any of our customers and ongoing prospects listening today will probably have heard from me at some point. I get really into the detail when we get to kind of building solutions, looking at our customers' challenges. My responsibilities are kind of wearing a couple of hats, which makes this sort of really useful for the conversation today. So, primarily I'm looking after the pre-sale side of things. We're working with existing and new customers on finding solutions to their challenges, whether that be extending their existing solution or moving on to a Sage product from elsewhere. I also look after all of our partnerships. So where all of these solutions, Sage 200, Sage Intacct particularly, are extended through all of our strategic partners, looking after all of those, what they offer, where they can add benefit to the ecosystem. And then, for those that might not know much about Innov8, whilst we are a Sage partner, we also develop solutions that work within the Sage ecosystem as well. We've got a number of solutions on Sage's various marketplaces. And so I look after those from a product perspective, getting really into the detail, having to understand how Sage 200, Sage Intacct, Sage 50 are working so that we can complement those solutions with our own verticals as well.
So a pretty wide and varied role. I said I had the right person for the conversation. I feel vindicated in that. So obviously maybe a really good starting point to talk about, Chris, is why is this conversation happening now? Sage 200 versus Sage Intacct. Why is it happening now? And why is it maybe even more so relevant than ever before?
Sage Intacct is becoming the buzzword of the Sage channel, if you like, probably this year and last year. A lot more people are hearing about it. Sage are making a lot more noise around it. The growth in the UK market is sort of ramping up massively. So the conversation keeps happening because people are hearing about it. And they're just asking us about it. Is it right for us? What is this? We've never heard of it before. And I think really it's a case of us diving into, is it the right fit? It's not the only solution. I know that Sage are putting a lot of investment into Intacct, and again, we'll dive into that. But Sage, they have solutions that offer a product for all sizes of business, and Intacct fits a really large spectrum of those businesses now. But there are still businesses that fit outside of that Intacct space.
Okay. Sage are putting the product into a marketplace because there's a need for that product in the market. It's a commercial decision in that space. So how has the finance systems market then changed to open up the door to a software as a service product like Sage Intacct, and maybe over the last, probably 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a big shift in how businesses are using sort of ERP business management solutions. And again, when we dive into the differences of Sage 200, for example, we went through a phase of being in a marketplace where everybody wanted everything under one roof. They wanted to log into one system, and they wanted to have every business operation that they could possibly undertake in one system. And that's, Sage 200 performs really well in that space. But, with the likes of cloud, the likes of AI, accessibility, COVID was probably a big driver if we're far enough away to be allowed to talk about that now. The shift has moved from let's get everybody into one system to let's get everybody in the right system. And sometimes the right system might be one system. When we look at Sage 200, that still is the case for a number of industries. But in the likes of Sage Intacct, it really is a powerful finance management system. And yes, it's got commercials. Yes, we've got, an element of manufacturing, an element of construction now where we're seeing that operational piece being built out. But first and foremost, it's a really powerful finance management and reporting platform And the power of that platform is from data. So, if we start to plug in, best of breed solutions in various industries, we end up with a really powerful tech stack that, in a lot of instances is entirely cloud hosted as well, which means that the business can literally operate across all these systems from anywhere. No longer being tied down to expensive hosting platforms or expensive hardware. And the ability to extend those systems and bolt things on is a lot easier than it used to be. So as the business has a new challenge or, grows maybe even unexpectedly, these systems and that tech stack can really adapt to that change a lot quicker than we've seen in the past with maybe traditional on-premise solutions.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned COVID, because I think that was the first real marker that people looked at going, well, how can I access my business systems if I'm not in the office consistently? And obviously, I think we've all seen a shift in workplace habits around that. But actually then, therefore, looking at hosted systems or cloud-based solutions means that you can work wherever, whenever. And we've been talking about it for years, but actually that was a real driver for people to actually make some real change. And again, it's as you think you've kind of saying already, and we can maybe get into the detail now. It is that horses for courses kind of conversation, isn't it? And I think we can really start to maybe pick that apart a little bit now. So Sage 200, maybe the solution that people are possibly a little bit more familiar with as existing customers of Innov8, but also it's a really well-established product within the market. So where does Sage 200 still fit really well?
Yeah, I mean, Sage 200 is a really well-rounded product, and even today, there's an element of comfort around that product. There's customers that we will speak to today, there's businesses that we'll speak to today that might be a perfect fit for something like Intacct, but just fundamentally, the skills in the business, the knowledge of the product will drive them to Sage 200 anyway, just from a comfort and familiarity piece. But when we kind of break it down into industry, whilst technically any industry could operate in a cloud environment, there's a number of businesses that, maybe sometimes need that stability of being on an on-premise solution. And those industries would generally be distribution-based businesses that have got heavy stock fulfillment, maybe warehouses on quite a large scale. The idea that, an internet connection on an industrial estate goes off there offline and can't send things to customers is quite daunting. So having a server in the back room that, whether the internet is active or not, the local network will still support picking operations is such a important piece of that tech stack, that puzzle for them. So we definitely say in that industry that generally, large scale WMS, an on-prem solution is still a go-to, and probably still from a manufacturing perspective, again, where the solution is physically driving that operation on the site. Yes, I mentioned before, Intacct does have a manufacturing offering now, and we are starting to see that manufacturing space start to, I wouldn't say embrace cloud, but maybe explore cloud. Maybe they're a little bit curious now as to what everybody else has been having, and maybe they want a bit of a piece of it. But when you really dive into it, again, sort of high volume, large scale manufacturing businesses, if they switch off, the entire business is down. So that ability to have a local connection, a server in the building that's supporting those operations by the minute is still a really strong selling point for the likes of Sage 200.
And I feel like we probably should remind ourselves a little bit about some of the actual core strengths of Sage 200 as a product, with its modular base and different modules that can then access different levels of functionality in that intercrossing of shared knowledge across a whole business. So what are those core strengths again?
Yeah, I mean, all these industries that we've just mentioned before, and sort of breaking into other, industries, field service, so we've mentioned construction, project management based industries. They are traditionally industries that, to be honest, will do finance in a system and everything else on a spreadsheet and out of the system. So, even that first step of putting everything into one system is really powerful because it gives everybody a full view of the business. Looking at the likes of Sage Business Cloud Accounting, Sage 50, Xero, QuickBooks, those solutions are traditionally being used for financial purposes, accounting systems as they would be called. And that's those solutions are where people would be generally managing their operations, their commercial detail outside of the system. And that still relies on a lot of manual reporting, a lot of manual consolidation of data to kind of run the business. So even, just taking all those systems and going into Sage 200 really, maybe adding on a commercials module to manage stock or inventory, or adding on a projects module, it means that you've got one view of the world. The idea that if a customer rings up in field service and, has a problem with, let's take one of our customers as an example, they've got a faulty fridge. The idea that somebody could go into Sage 200, view that customer, view the financial information. Yes, do they owe us money? Should we be helping this customer? We could always do that in the likes of Sage 50. But then being able to see, well, okay, do they have cover on this fridge? Do we have the availability of an engineer to go out and see them? And being able to do all of that within Sage 200, from taking a phone call to booking an engineer on site, to even the engineer being able to say they're on site. And as soon as that's sort of completed on a device, being pushed back into Sage 200, just gives that element of real-time data. And that's taking businesses that are operating on spreadsheets and operating off system, if we say, to being able to make real-time decisions on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis, which having no system gives them no ability to do that.
And I think one of the other aspects that we've maybe not spoke about yet is the ability to actually develop that beyond the core capabilities, and then start to bring in partner solutions and integrations that really then starts to leverage the strength of Sage 200. So just talk to us briefly and remind us briefly about the development capabilities and also the connectivity aspect.
Yeah, so development capability is probably one of the big strengths of Sage 200, to be honest, over Intacct. Whilst Intacct can be extended, and we'll maybe talk about that in a little bit. There is restrictions, there are barriers in a multi-tenanted SaaS solution, because everyone's singing off the same hymn sheet. So I guess one of the beauties of Sage 200, it is entirely extensible. Yes, there's a marketplace out there of solution providers that we work very closely with that will do everything from improving the process of sending an invoice by email through to building an entire, as I was mentioning before, field service solution or manufacturing solution directly into the system. And there's a whole range of off-the-shelf add-ons that can be plugged in that will meet the needs of most industries out there. But really where Sage 200 does come into its own is how extensible it is from a development perspective. We have businesses that will run their entire operations on Sage 200 in, all sorts of weird and wonderful industries. And we've built the entire functionality for them to do that. It's not that we've gone and taken an off-the-shelf product and plugged it in. We've taken the core Sage 200 solution with its financials and its commercials sometimes. So it's sales orders, it's purchase orders, it's stock, and built a whole workflow of operations around that with completely bespoke screens, processes. You technically can have a bespoke business management solution built in Sage 200 on top of a core standardized finance and commercial package. And that's something that not many solutions in the market can offer, to be honest. If you can dream it, we can probably write it. And, we have a really great development team that help us bring some of those ideas and some of those customer requirements to life, and far beyond anything really that any cloud native SaaS solution could offer.
Yes, it's customizable a little bit more than bolting something into it or adding a button on a screen. It can really go deep and, as you say, different screens and workflows. And I think that is a real key consideration, isn't it? If you've got that level of detail that you want to be processing tasks within a cloud-based solution that is effectively one size fits most kind of approach. And I think this is where Sage 200 has always been. It's like one size fits most, but we can really make it fit very detailed for you. So let's just switch horses slightly. What therefore makes Sage Intacct different?
Sage Intacct has a bigger focus on finance, definitely, that's for sure. The commercial piece has been a more recent addition over recent years in terms of stock control and improving that. And obviously more recently, construction and manufacturing. Intacct is really powerful when it comes to our core financial reporting piece. Whenever I'm talking to somebody about Sage 200 and Sage Intacct, I would say that Sage 200 is very transactional reporting. You can get the detail out. You can run, what happened yesterday in terms of a line by line level. Sage 200 is fantastic at doing that. taking a top level P&L and saying, show me what's going on across the group or what's going on in this segment of the business is a lot more challenging, really. You know, whilst Sage 200 can be extended in terms of the likes of analysis codes, and yes, we've got a 3-tiered nominal structure in Sage 200, which means we can report down to a level of, say, nominal code, cost center and department. We have to think about that structure really a lot in advance, whereas Intacct is a dimension-based accounting system. So whilst we've still got our department and our class or our cost center or whatever we're going to use it for and our nominal code, our customer, our supplier, our physical location, our employees, our items, if we've got, stock items, warehouses, projects, if we've got that, all of that data goes down to the granular financial level. And that means being able to run a financial report to say, do you know what? Today, I want to know what my profit and loss is across the group, split by stock item. To try and do that in Sage 200 would be really difficult because it's not a summary. It's a transaction level detail. Doing that in Intacct is clicks of a button, and that would allow us to transform that summarized data to present that level of detail. And that is where it massively differs. Any business that's doing multi-entity, so operates in multiple businesses, wanting to get a holistic view of the world, Intacct really allows you to do that with very little effort. Things like being able to see, what have we done with this customer across multiple companies? What have we done with this supplier across multiple companies? What does our group profit look like? All of that in the likes of Sage 200 and many other ERP and finance systems. As soon as you ask that question, people are exporting data to spreadsheets, mapping it around, copying and pasting, making errors, I'm sure, as they're doing that, just to try and get that one view of the world. Whereas an Intacct instance that has been properly built and properly considered can give those answers in the click of a button. If somebody decides to ask the next question, well, what's that made up of? Or, well, what does it look like if we want to view it from this lens? Intacct makes it really easy to flick that view, to drill into the detail and start answering those questions, not just give you the headline figures, but actually saying, give me some support on this. What is this made up of? And it's a click of a button to drill into that in Intacct and get to that granular detail then.
So you've kind of mentioned about like the real-time visibility, the granular detail, the multi-entity capabilities of Sage Intacct. And if anyone's looked at any overviews of the product, the other word that they'll see sticking out quite a lot is cloud native. What does cloud native actually mean in practice?
Yeah, cloud native is how we access the platform. If we compare again with Sage 200 as we're doing throughout this episode, if we just think about the architecture of Sage 200 or even Sage 50 in a business environment, there's a server somewhere. It doesn't matter if it's on-prem server or hosted in the cloud. It's still a physical environment that's been provisioned for the use of that software. That means that to access that solution, you need an application installed somewhere, whether again that be on your local machine or whether that be in a hosted environment, and you're having to access that application. That then means that application, when new versions are released, has to be upgraded manually. There's time involved in doing that to get those new releases. And part of that is around stability, that bespoke piece we were talking about. It would be a little bit more concerned if there was automatic updates that could break some of your bespoke functionality. So there's a reason, method in that madness, if you like. Intacct is completely different. So whilst there's a server somewhere, in that somewhere with Intacct, it's in a data center, usually in AWS, which is an Amazon data center. So we don't get direct access to that data because there's thousands of customers' data held in that data center. But the real difference, the real benefit is how we access that data and how we access that application. It removes the need for that on-premise application style, installed application on a physical Windows machine. We can start to access it in a web browser, and that then means I could do that on a Mac, on a PC, even on my phone. It will present certain bits of information, dashboards, things like that on a mobile view within a web browser, and really access from anywhere. Obviously, there's security that we could dive into a whole area of security, but there's still elements of security put in place, whether that be multi-factor authentication, sending you a PIN or getting a PIN, or single sign-on so it's still linked into your network. That all still exists. But should the business allow access from anywhere, there really is no limit. You could be on site with a customer. You could be sat on a beach. We've said this for years. Certain reporting solutions we've gone, well, you can see how the business is running when you're sat on a beach. And, that's been somewhat true in the past. It's really true today. You really can be seeing what the business is doing sat on a beach. But even more impressive today is that you could be transacting and running the business from wherever that may be as well.
And I think that's really is a key distinction of how easy it is to maybe get at a system. Yes, things can be cloud hosted and you can access it in a way that feels that it's cloud-based, but the reality of it is it's not. And that maybe then starts to come with limitations. So when we then start to look at Sage Intacct, we kind of said where Sage 200 is a really good fit. Where is Sage Intacct a really good fit?
Sage Intacct is a really good fit for every business, to be honest. And that might be a bit of a cop-out answer initially, but it really is, because every business needs to manage finance, and they need to manage finance in an effective and controlled manner. And Sage Intacct ticks that box. Where Intacct really is a sweet spot is, not-for-profit, professional services, hospitality. Construction even now is a really, really nice sweet spot because, to be honest, we talk construction and people imagine somebody with a trowel laying bricks. And that is the reality of construction. But really, when we talk construction, we talk about being able to manage those projects from a control perspective. Are we within budget? What are our costs? What's the completion of that? And, really doing a bit of project financials, project management. Sage Intacct is really strong in all of those spaces. Anywhere where we need to be able to relate data, really strongly sort of monitor data, monitor trends. Sage Intacct is really strong in that space. And to be honest, it's really strong in any space that has a best of breed solution, because Intacct has a really powerful API. So we're not talking about Sage Intacct sitting here standalone and just running these not-for-profit, construction, hospitality-based businesses. Hospitality, for example, when you go to a hotel, they don't check you in on Sage Intacct, even if that's the financial system. There's a whole load of best-of-breed hospitality-based solutions that have got APIs and will integrate those transactions into the finance system. And, Intacct is really powerful from that perspective as well. Historically, integrations have been embraced, but people have tried to be really summarized again. We'll do a day's worth of sales and we'll push a single figure into our finance system. That isn't where we want to be with Sage Intacct. We want to be pushing each individual booking, each individual sale, each individual purchase into Sage Intacct. It can handle it. These APIs aren't going to break a sweat when we're trying to push this volume of data in, provided, again, we've set the system up properly. By getting that level of granularity into the finance system, we can take advantage of all that reporting. That's what we want to do. We don't want to be pushing summary balances into Sage Intacct. We want to be pushing all that detail in so that we can make use of its reporting. So that people in the finance team can see that level of granularity. So yeah, there's some industries that are a real sweet spot, and they're those service-based businesses or those low stock-based businesses, I would say. But really, any business that's got a really strong best-of-breed solution in their industry that can be integrated with, they're a sweet spot too, really, because they might as well take advantage of that really strong best-of-breed finance solution, really.
Brilliant. So I'm starting to get a bit of a picture that it's not necessarily a better versus worst kind of conversation. It's more about fit and future, other things that are happening within the tech stack environment. So if someone's utilizing the system, what are the biggest differences they're going to maybe notice from a user perspective, operationally, reporting? What are those real differences start to look like?
I think a really good place to start here, which is maybe going to break the mold, because a lot of people have covered this on various podcasts and webinars, and everyone dives straight into reporting and, what you get out of the system. I think we should scale it back, to be honest. They look completely different. And that's a benefit in its own right, because, we're talking about Sage 200 being that operational system in a lot of businesses, manufacturing, for example. There's a lot of complex data that needs added there, which means there's a lot of complex forms and screens and functions that need to be accessed. Trying to fit that into a web browser, as we're talking about in cloud native, is a bit of an ask. Intacct doesn't necessarily go to that level of detail because of its finance focus, which actually means the use of the system is a lot more straightforward, to be honest. when we look at users that have never used Sage 200 and have never used Sage Intacct, and we put them in front of both systems, Intacct is a lot more widely embraced. It's a lot more intuitive because it has to be simple, because it's running in a web browser, it's running on a mobile device. It can't be complicated. It has to still do all that powerful stuff. It has to still record all of that detail, but it has to deliver that to people in a really simplified format, making sure they can enter it in as easy a way as possible. So actually the use of Sage Intacct on a day-to-day basis is a massive difference. Sage 200, the focus is always on functionality. What do we need it to do? Somebody's asked us to do this in the system. How do we make it do this? I feel like, the team that are developed, or the teams that are developing Sage Intacct, as the development's much more widely broken out. But there's a big focus on user experience and user interface. We know what they want to do. How do we make it so that they can do that in the most simplified, easy way? And some of that we're seeing coming through with Intacct is AI driven. We'll start to see that in cloud native solutions a lot more commonly. Equally, make it so that they have to enter the information with things like mandatory fields, because ultimately then that drives the reporting, that drives the output. Everyone talks about the buzz stuff in Intacct. Yes, it's got dashboards and you can drill into stuff, and that's really fantastic, and it is fantastic. It sets itself apart from all these other solutions. It looks sexy. It really does. People's face lights up when you show them Intacct. But the nice thing is, when they're developing it, they're focusing on how people build that in the first place. How does the data get in there to give that output? And I think, all the webinars and all the sessions I go to, they all talk about that stuff at the end, which is all fantastic. And, everyone loves that, and it sells Intacct. It does. If Intact's going to work, you show someone a dashboard and they're sold, because, to get that in other systems, you've got to go and buy more third-party solutions. But really, I think people miss the trick of, I've just shown you how we get to that. And I entered a purchase order and I only clicked open one screen. I didn't click open 3 windows. It's just taking you 2 clicks less. And I think we should focus on that as well, because at the end of the day, we tend to sell this to top of the chain. Finance managers, CFOs, they're looking at what that output looks like. But where we don't focus is on, but what does it look like for the day-to-day, for the people that are entering these transactions to do their day-to-day? And even from that perspective, it's not like we get a much more comprehensive output, so it makes it a really complex input. That's not the case. It's quite the opposite. Actually, the input is simplified as well. So there's a win-win. Bottom of the funnel and the top of the funnel information coming out as well.
I think I just found my soundbite for promoting the podcast. That's Intacct really is sexy. So just staying on the promotion side of things for a moment. Obviously, we had a really good conversation last time with Jenny. If you've not listened to that episode, go back, have a listen to the conversation with Jenny. But it leads me on to my next question for you, Chris, which is obviously yourself and Jenny are going into sites and talking to people about the differences between kind of 200 and Sage Intacct. And I just want to know, do those conversations maybe differ? You kind of saying you may be speaking to maybe different people within those businesses, but also are those conversations direct a little bit differently because of the functionality of the solution? Is there a difference there?
Yeah, again, it depends what kind of industry we're going into. If we're going into an industry that really is an Intacct sweet spot, we tend to be engaged with the finance department, the CFO, sometimes CEO, MD level, that have looked for us a finance solution. When we're engaging with customers that their initial fit is Sage 200, we tend to be dealing a lot more with the operational teams, and they're asking, how do we do things, not how do we get stuff out. But ultimately, they all end up in the same place because people get pulled in throughout the sales process. The questions we get asked are pretty common. How do we get data out? Where does the data live? How do we take benefits of this data on both systems? And they will use some of that feedback or response to make their decision. Whilst we say that a sweet spot for Intacct is hospitality, not-for-profit, construction, these things, it does massively depend on the current solution architecture of the business and where the business is going as well. One of the benefits of Sage 200 is that the database, whether it be on-premise or hosted, privately, it's a fully accessible database. And so where you have multiple systems across the business where you might want to consolidate that data into a single BI solution, for example, Focus, who we work with, there is a benefit of an on-premise solution there. So even if we're sat here today talking to charity. We have a number of charities that are customers with us. We still have a large number of those organizations that are sat on Sage 200 and have explored Intacct. But ultimately, they have, over time, built these really complex business reporting solutions that directly interrogate the data in Sage 200. And to be honest, for them, a lot of that effort is now what's supporting the future growth of the business. And so for them to replace it with Intacct, whilst yes, it probably could give them some of that reporting as standard, the value of having all of their systems data feed into this dashboarding solution or this analytics solution means that they don't need to consider Intacct, because actually they're getting the value that Intacct might add for them within their Sage 200 solution. So it's not just like saying, well, you're a charity, what are you doing on Sage 200? There is value in keeping that existing business solution if it can be adapted to offer that. And I mean, I mentioned AI before. AI is obviously a buzz at the minute. We've got AI in Sage Intacct, we've got Sage Copilot. And yes, that's all being built into Sage Intacct. There's a lot of investment going into Intacct in terms of AI. The reason for that is because of that architecture. It's a cloud native solution. There's a lot of data in there that Sage can use to train AI models and, give benefits to a large scale of businesses, because everyone's storing their data in the same way. So they can apply that logic basically to everybody on that standardized model. And so putting AI into Intacct is, I was going to say it's really easy. It's not easy. A lot of people are working really hard on doing this and it takes a lot of thought. But putting AI in Sage 200, because the data structure might be different. People have got bespoke, they've got third-party modules. It's a lot more complex. You can't have a one solution fits all. But what you can do is have a reporting solution or an external AI solution that takes all of that business data, consumes it, and then adds an AI layer over the top. That's conversations we're having a lot. People come to us and they say, well, I need Intacct because I need AI. And that's great. If you've got no AI right now, if you've got no automation, if you are focusing on finance and you don't really know where to start, to be honest, then Intacct will give you a leg up. There's a load of stuff going in there. Sage will support that AI journey to start helping you embrace AI from a data perspective, from a bit of an automation perspective. But if you're coming to us saying, well, I need AI, but I have data in all of these places that we're already pulling together, then you don't need Intacct necessarily. You need to have an AI objective that considers those solutions. The answer isn't just to plug Intacct in and see what AI in cloud finance can do. It's to consider how your solution stack feeds into AI. So yeah, we get that a lot. We do get a lot of companies coming to us saying, I need Intacct because I need AI. And then the conversation obviously broadens from that. And actually, when you dive into it, an opportunity that might have come in as Intacct for that sole purpose ends up moving to Sage 200, because the business operational benefit is actually Sage 200 will give you all of this functionality that you need. We can still layer that AI and automation and integration on top of that.
Okay, so we started to talk about kind of migrating and moving systems, and maybe kind of spoke there a little bit about those conversations that maybe aren't a great fit. And I think, again, we'll come back to the word just solution fit. So what are businesses considering, and what are businesses gaining benefit from? I'd say, even dare say, migrating from Sage 50 to Sage Intacct, from, we've got our agile methodology, but also from Sage 200 to Sage Intacct. We're starting to see that kind of path open up a lot more for customers migrating. So, why are those conversations starting a lot of the time, and why are businesses deciding to move?
It comes down to all those triggers for change that we often see. We've mentioned some of them: consolidated reporting, remote access, automation, integration, systems slowed down to a halt, corrupt data, all those kind of things. We try not to focus on the migration journey when determining what solution to go to. The reason for that is because the platforms are structured entirely differently. Back, 10, 12 years ago, when Sage 200 was the only offering really that we would push for Sage 50, there is a migration tool. One of the beauties of that migration is we can take a Sage 50 data set, make it sound easier than it is, but we can basically run it through a tool, and it spits a Sage 200 database out the other side with all your transactional history in. That is a really great value proposition for Sage 200. That's really drawn a lot of businesses onto Sage 200 in the past. And yes, we would obviously sell that as a massive benefit of Sage 200. But businesses are looking at now is not just that ease of migration, because that kind of sticky plasters over a load of areas that might actually be a trigger for change. One of the big triggers for change that we see is that the business is either growing or changing or starting to offer new things. And actually, a lot of that data in the current system is redundant, irrelevant, structured incorrectly. So actually, the idea of, it sounds perfect, doesn't it? I'm just going to pick up my system as it is today, I'm going to transform the data, and I'm going to have everything in this new system, and I can move forward with this shiny new system. The trouble with that is, to do that, you don't really get much opportunity to restructure, to change that. And for a lot of businesses, that structure is maybe what's holding them back. And so when you look to move on to Sage Intacct, we try and recommend that customers go on to an open imbalance approach and move across as little data as possible. Now, yes, we can pull in historic data. We can remap things into Sage Intacct. It's not saying that we can't do that. But you want to really consider that, because this really is an opportunity to sit back, look at the structure of everything and really refine it, make it better, make it support what the business is going to be doing in the next 5-10 years. And so, part of the process of moving on to Sage Intacct, we don't start the project by going, great, give us some data. We start the project by saying, okay, let's talk about the business processes. Let's talk about the structure of your reporting requirements, not what you're doing today. What do you want to do? What do we need to be able to get out of the system? What are the challenges of the system that you've got today? Because then we really need to understand how that structure, is going to fit into Intacct. And then from doing that, we can say, okay, this is what data we're really going to bring across. And for that data that we are going to bring across, this is how we're going to transform it. The migration piece has gone from being a functional, transactional part of the process where we say one day, give us Sage 50 data, tomorrow, there you go, there's your new system, to being a really fundamental part of the process. Before we even show you how to process a transaction or create a customer, we're starting before that and saying, what do we need this system to achieve? Because ultimately the data that we put in from day one is going to set a precedent. It's going to define how this system works in the future.
So again, maybe it's just that evolution of the conversation from migration to actually using it as a really good opportunity for a structured review. And I think this opens up a really good segue into talking about something that we've internally looked at as a review point, because as a business, we're moving from Sage 200 to Sage Intacct internally. You've had a big hand in that conversation from, internal engagement and stakeholders internally. So how is Innov8 looking at embracing Intacct and taking that journey that many of our customers will be wanting to take or at least consider as well?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, to be honest, because I've had the benefit of seeing this sort of as part of what my day-to-day role would be, but obviously from a leadership perspective as well, to see how it's impacting all the other departments. When we undertook this exercise, and it's ongoing at the minute, but when we undertook this exercise, we decided that we were going to treat ourselves as a customer. So I didn't go into a dark room and just say, right, we're going to do this with Intacct, and then tomorrow appear and say, let's get moving. We went through the same process as we would go through with a prospect. So we sat down with all of the departments. We reviewed what they did in Sage 200 and all of our sort of supporting systems. We asked about challenges. We asked about things that took a lot of time, a lot of effort, errors, mistakes. And we did a proper discovery. We put together a full statement of works. We demoed to each of the departments, and we built a full solution. So, our Sage 200 system, as you might expect, being a development tech partner and a business partner, we haven't got a standard Sage 200 system. I can tell you that much. It's heavily bespoke and has been over the years. And obviously, as we mentioned, Sage Intacct doesn't, for the right reasons, allow that level of customization. And so we've reviewed our processes and thought, well, we need to standardize that. We've also gone through a process which has been really exciting for implementing some of our marketplace and solution partners as well. So areas where, in the past we'd written some quite complex bespoke, we've decided to actually reach out to our partners and implement their solutions as well. And so, we're going through that process at the minute, and it's really exciting seeing, what it looks like for a customer. But it also helps me to appreciate, it's not easy. Moving systems is not easy. I've just said it's not a lift and shift. And so, being able to appreciate the challenges that each of these departments face when going through a migration, I think will help us. And is it already helping me relate to the conversations I'm having with prospects? We're starting to consider things that I'd never really considered before around this data structure, around how are we doing some of these processes, even down to how we manage our credit control, and how we manage our project invoicing, getting into that level of detail and saying, well, why do we do this? Why are we doing this? And there's things that we've just done for years where actually by implementing Intacct, we can be a lot more focused on, other pain points, other areas, other challenges in the business, because the day-to-day that we're currently having to double key in some instances or, send data between systems, that's all going to be transformed by Intacct. And so I hope that the benefit we're going to see when we go live, we can replay that then to our customers. And, because it is a scary experience moving systems. A lot of people, especially Sage 200, we've got customers that have been on Sage 200 for 10, 15 years that are now considering Intacct, and nobody remembers the world before they had Sage 200. It's really nice that we can relate to them, and because all of our leadership team and departments are involved in it, it means that our head of projects, they understand what it feels like to go on to Sage Intacct. So when a customer is asking questions about a project, we're able to say, this is what we did. This is, this question you've got, I had exactly the same question, and this is what we discussed, and this is what we did. I think that's really going to allow us to offer a next level service, really, a next level implementation for our customers.
Yeah, I was going to ask actually, like, has it maybe changed customer conversations and understanding? I think you've answered that already. I guess maybe the final point on this in terms of like having that expertise across different platforms. So today we've spoken exclusively about 200 and Intacct. I think obviously Sage 50 also forms part of that, but having the expertise across these different platforms from an Innov8 perspective, how has that helped the internal conversations? Because the strengths and potentially the pitfalls that exist. And you always mentioned a heavily bespoke system versus a standardized system. So how's that kind of materialized in doing it internally?
The benefit we've had with our internal system is that we know what we've got. We know what the solution architecture looked like. And so we had a really good starting point, because from a current solution architecture, we had that visibility. We don't always get that visibility. We are specialists in the Sage 50, Sage 200 space. A lot of the time when we're speaking to customers about Intacct, they're not our existing customers. So the beauty is we do have the skill and expertise at that pre-sale stage to be able to understand what someone's solution architecture already looks like. And that's really important, because we understand what people are doing in the current platform today to make sure that they don't lose functionality. We keep talking about adding all these great things on, but there will be fundamental parts of a business process that we have to keep the same, and we have to make sure still works in Sage Intacct, for example. And I think a lot of the success we have is our guys, they know how people are using Sage 50, Sage 200. They know the questions to ask, and they seem like silly questions sometimes. You'll get asked a question, but I don't really understand why that's relevant. But there's a reason for it, because we want to make sure that we're not just going, Sage Intacct is going to give you this 60% improvement on this reporting at the end. If you lose 80% of the functionality at the start, then it's going to cause a big problem in the business. We're really lucky that the guys that we've got are either specialists in a number of the products that we've worked with over the years, or have direct communication with people that still are specialists in those other products as well.
I mean, we've had some great insight covered off today, Chris. And I'm trying something new for the first time on the podcast today, but it's to finish off with some quick fire questions. Now, for anybody that knows you, quick fire question answering is maybe not your forte. I'm not quite going to pull up the clock and put you on a 30-second, but I want you to have that mental 30-second timer in your head. I've got 5 questions. I want a real fast fire, quick answer. The first question, one myth about Sage Intacct.
Oh, a myth about Sage Intacct. I mean, it's, an amazing platform. There can't be any myths about Sage Intacct. The biggest myth about Sage Intacct that I get sort of asked and see online a lot is that there's an expectation that Sage Intacct is just this AI and automation beast that we're going to put in one day and it's going to transform everybody's life. It absolutely has the ability to do that. But, data is king. I think that the thing is, you have to have the right solutions in place. The myth is, maybe we're going to put it in and it's going to solve all of our problems. It has the ability to solve those problems, but it can't do it on its own. The data, the other systems, the integrations between those systems is absolutely fundamental.
Okay, next question then. One myth about Sage 200.
The biggest myth about Sage 200 that we've probably been asked for a number of years now is, when are they going to turn it off? When's it going to die? What's the end of life for Sage 200? And or the myth is that there is an end of life for Sage 200. It's just not the case. In the SME marketplace in the UK and Ireland, Sage 200 is still a really strong contender. It's still the backbone of net new business for Sage. It's not going anywhere. It has a roadmap for legislation changes and development going well into the future, and trying to make it as cloud connected as possible, because obviously the benefit is the on-prem architecture and that extensible architecture, but there's an understanding that it needs to be a bit more web enabled, let's say, or cloud connected. But yeah, it's not going anywhere. And we'll get a lot of notice if it ever does, is what I would say. I think there's customers still using Sage Line 100, and that's been end of life for 20 plus years. So it's not just going to disappear tomorrow. You're not going to get out of bed and Sage 200's disappeared.
Brilliant. Excellent. Okay. I'm going to challenge you on this next one to keep it within 30 seconds because you're starting to drift. Okay. What's the biggest mistake business can make when reviewing systems?
The biggest mistake is expectation. Because you've already got another solution in place in the business, you immediately expect that you only have one or a limited number of systems to go on to. Luckily, I've had conversations of people that are using other vendors' CRM solutions, and immediately they think they've got one choice of finance system, and that is from the same vendor. It's not the case at all. We live in a world where systems can talk to each other. APIs are really common. Don't pigeonhole yourself into one solution just because you think it's the only option you've got.
That's your fastest answer yet. Okay, question 4, penultimate one. What's one thing finance teams should stop tolerating?
Oh, I think corrections, data errors, integrations we've talked about a lot, automated systems, using the right platforms. I think there's still an expectation. We get it a lot during demos. How do I fix this when I do something wrong? It's a question that we need to ask because we need to be able to correct it. But people are tolerating corrections. People are just expecting that data is going to be wrong. And I think, they should start asking the question, why is it wrong and how do we stop it being wrong in the first place?
You're getting better at answering these questions succinctly. Okay, so final question, and this is also maybe a bit of a final thought. I might let you have a little bit longer than 30 seconds on this one. So what does good finance technology look like then in 2026?
Good finance technology is going to be specific to each industry and each business, because the requirements of every business, even in the same sector, are going to be different. But what does good look like? I think good looks like a solution stack that is communicating with each other, not having disparate business systems, not having to double key information, having that core base of good quality data. I don't think you need to be doing AI in 2026. I think you should start exploring it, but you're not going to be an AI powerhouse by the end of 2026. It's the buzzword of the century. There's a place for it, but there's still a place for day-to-day transacting. So I think good finance technology means having a best-of-breed solution for your industry, having probably a pathway, a journey of how does the business need to grow with technology over the next 3 to 5 years. I think that's probably where people need to be at in 2026.
A pleasure as always, Chris. Some real good depth and insight there, and hopefully, well, I've learned some stuff today, so I'm sure people listening have. But that's it for today's episode of the Finance Function. As I say, hopefully today's conversation has given you a little bit of a clearer understanding of those differences between Sage 200 and Sage Intacct, but more importantly, how businesses should be trying to approach the conversation. Huge thanks to Chris for joining us today and sharing his insights. If you would like to learn more about either Sage 200 or Sage Intacct and explore what the right next step could be for you, please make sure you check out the Innov8 website. And if you have enjoyed today's episode, make sure you give the Finance Function a follow wherever you get your podcasts. So until next time, keep moving further faster. Pretending that I've done my vocal exercises before we get going.
Get my PA to grab me some bottles of water and touch up the powder on my nose so I don't go shiny under the spotlight.